Experiments is the OJ incrementality system. The first controlled clinical trial was run way back in the year 1747. The Scottish naval surgeon called James Lind was trying to find a cure for scurvy, a disease caused by vitamin C deficiency, by comparing different remedies, including citrus fruits, on a group of sailors. Lind recognized the need for a systematic approach to finding a cure. He conducted a controlled experiment on 12 sailors, dividing them into groups and giving them different treatments. The patients were given identical basic diets but different treatments. While some got ciders, some oranges and lemon juice, and some even got a pint of seawater and sulfuric acid. Lind's trial demonstrated that the sailors who received citrus fruits, that is oranges and lemons, recovered remarkably well, while those on the other treatments showed little or no improvement. Lind published this study in a 1753 paper called Treatise of Scurvy. Note that vitamin C in itself was only discovered in 1920s. In the book Extra Life, Stephen Johnson tells the story of how humanity managed to increase its average lifespan by 20,000 days in the last 100 years. The book talks about discoveries ranging from smallpox vaccines and antibiotics to inventions such as seat belts, among many others. According to the book, RCTs, randomized controlled double-blind tests, have become a cornerstone of modern medicine, saving many millions of lives since its adoption. Conceptually, it is pretty simple and straightforward. Let us say you want to understand the impact of Google branded search on your revenue. You can perform a holdout test in certain geographies by not spending on your brand keywords for a period of time, and then compare the impact in those geographies against certain other similar geographies where you had maintained the status quo. This is exactly what eBay did, and we spoke about this in an earlier video where we introduced the concept of incrementality. However, in another video on causal MMM, we also discussed a case where this could go terribly wrong. If your treatment cohort is not similar to your control cohort, then you will end up making wrong inferences from your experiments. Let us take another example. Say you launched a new channel during your peak holiday season. Your overall marketing budget is about $1 million a month. Your new channel got an investment of $50,000 in that same month. At the end of the month, you saw that your revenue has increased from $5 million in the last month to $6 million this month. Can you attribute this additional $1 million to the $50,000 that you spent in the new experimental channel? That is 20x incremental ROAS from the new channel. Clearly not. There are some other factors at play here. We respect the culture that we see emerging among the marketers, where they make minor changes in one variable at a time and wait to see noticeable impact from this so as to learn from it. That is by running small experiments. Lifesight is all about enabling an experimentation culture. However, as we saw in the last example, it's more complex than that. Most of the value from running experiments depend on getting the design of experiments right. For every way in which you could run a good test, there are countless ways to run the same test incorrectly. An experiment that's not rigorously designed is a failed experiment. Doesn't matter how well it is executed. The framework of experimentation is the edifice of inductive reasoning on top of which modern science is built. Inductive reasoning is the approach where you prove a specific instance of a case and then generalize that proof over all the other similar cases that is yet to be observed. It starts with an assumption that is testable, verifiable, and most importantly, disprovable. The assumption that you make has typically two parts. One, a null hypothesis, and two, an alternative hypothesis. A null hypothesis is typically the status quo state, which assumes that your intervention is not going to create any meaningful difference between the treatment group or the control group. The alternative hypothesis, on the other hand, assumes that your intervention will create a difference, the nature of which could be either unidirectional, that is, we are concerned about whether the effect is increasing or decreasing, or bidirectional, that is, we are concerned about whether there is some change or not, and not much about the direction of this change. The rigor that needs to go into the test depends on the claim that you have hypothesized. Less probable the claim, more data and time is needed to conclude the test. At this point, it's also very important to talk about the p-value. P-value is the probability of the data given the null hypothesis. If your null hypothesis is true, then what's the probability that you would see the data that you see? If the probability is high, that is, if p-value is high, then the null hypothesis cannot be rejected. P-value of 0.05 is typically considered sacrosanct in the scientific world. P-value of 0.05 translates to the fact that the probability of seeing the data that you see in your experiment is only 5% if the null hypothesis was correct. P-value of 0.05 or less would mean that you should reject the null hypothesis at 95% confidence. This is what successful tests are all about, rejection of null hypothesis. So, from what we have stated so far, experiment is nothing but a process of collecting enough data to disprove null hypothesis. In the marketing context, experiments have to overcome a set of unique challenges. These are some of them. Marketing does not happen in a laboratory. Here we are trying to understand the influence of certain creative pursuits on the human mind in complex real-world settings. It's difficult to control for all the factors across the entire ecosystem to ensure proper test execution. Perfect randomization is very hard. That's to find perfect cohorts of geography clusters or customer profiles to form the treatment and control groups is hard. Experiments are a time-consuming process. In science, experiments reveal some fundamental truths that can then be generalized to eternity. In marketing, the truth inferred from experiments is still seasonal and is susceptible to changes quite soon, which means we need to to repeat experiments frequently. A lot of opportunity cost is involved in running experiments. So it's important that testing hypotheses in itself should be generated scientifically whenever possible. Experiments should also be evaluated for their statistical power. Statistical power is the probability that the statistical test will correctly detect a real effect or difference when it exists, also known as the ability to avoid a type 2 error, that is, falsely failing to reject the null hypothesis. A type 1 error, on the other hand, occurs in hypothesis testing when you reject a true null hypothesis, meaning you conclude there's a significant effect or difference when in reality there isn't one. Marketing experiments are typically of three types: geography level testing, customer level testing, and time level testing. In the subsequent video, we will discuss these approaches in detail.